From the Center for the Study and Teaching of Writing at The Ohio State University, this is Writers Talk. I'm Doug Dangler. I'm here today at the Ohioana Book Festival on the beautiful Fort Hays campus in downtown Columbus, and I am talking to Kristina McBride, who is the author of the debut novel, The Tension of Opposites. So tell me about your book. How did it get started?
Well, it started after an awful lot of trying on my part to get myself published. It's actually the third book that I've written. I was inspired by an interview that I saw one day on Oprah. While my children were napping, I had a few minutes to relax, and she was interviewing Sean Hornbeck, who was kidnapped at the age of 11 and spent 4 years with his kidnapper and was found alive and returned to his parents at 15. So that interview, watching that interview, sparked the inspiration for this story, and I knew that I wanted to write a book about a kidnapping and return.
Okay. So did you do a lot more research into that particular thing, or did you just use it as a setting off point, the idea of the story?
I definitely did some research, but at the beginning I just needed to write the story. Okay. So after I got the story pretty much completed, I went back and did research as far as the kidnapper and what type of prison sentence he might have and that kind of thing. And Stockholm Syndrome, which is when you tend to kind of align with your kidnapper. Okay.
So how did that research change the way that you wrote the book or revised the book? What did you do after that?
It added more details, I think. That it fleshed characters out more, and it brought the story to a better close, I think, just getting the details right. But first and foremost, it's kind of writing the story that the character needs to tell and the journey that they need to take. For me, at least, it's my process, and then kind of getting the details right about the nitpicky stuff like jail sentence and things like that.
The nitpicky stuff, a jail sentence. I like the use of it. So when you wrote this, how long did it take you to write it? What was your process?
That's very interesting. It took me probably 3 or 4 months to write the first draft, which was very exciting because it's over pretty quickly. Well, then I had written 2 complete books before this one, and I used this book then to try and get an agent, and finally landed an agent on this being my 3rd draft. And I revised for about a year with my agent, which was a tough process. I did about 5 other drafts, five revisions of the book with my agent's assistance, and she's wonderful and she can pick anything apart, and I'm very lucky to have her. So it's been about a year on revisions, and then of course we sold the book, and then I had some more revisions and copy editing and things like that. So a few months for the first draft, but the major meat of the work came during revision.
What was the major meat of the revision? How did you do the revisions, and what were they like?
That was very, very hard. It was very hard. I kind of had 2 stories in one. My main character in the first draft that I wrote, which landed me my agent, she was on the yearbook staff at her school. And we realized as we were looking at the book, it's kind of like the yearbook story was separate and the kidnapping story was separate. So I kind of had to pick which one I needed to write. And obviously the kidnapping story was the one that inspired me. So that was what I chose, and took the yearbook story out of it. And instead she's in a photography class. Photography's been her way to kind of cope with the disappearance of her friend. And so I still was able to keep the photographs in because that element was important to me. But so that was a big thing, kind of debraiding the story that I had first written, kind of pulling the pieces apart and focusing on one major element, which was the kidnapping and the friendship.
Okay, did you say debreeding? Like
debraiding.
Like
a braid. Like I had to take the whole braid apart and pick one strand and stick with that.
Okay. I get that. I thought maybe for a moment you were using a medical term,
I
thought that was
I'm not
really
very medical.
That was a really gross metaphor, but that's wonderful.
No, my agent, in fact, one of the quotes that she told me when I was really into my revisions was to take it out of the braid and throw it up in a ponytail. So I threw it up in a ponytail, and it worked.
Those metaphors don't work for me, but I know they work for other people.
Yes.
So when you were writing this with, or you were revising this with your agent, it seems like a very different process than, say, going to a writing group. Have you been in writing groups, and can you compare something like that?
I have been in some. I think that in writing groups, people maybe tend to be a little bit more careful about their suggestion. And an agent, she's trying to help you sell a book, and she wants to make money off of you, and she wants you to make money off of your work. And she's worried about your career, or concerned, thinking about your career. So I think an agent can be more harsh with you, which is a good thing. You need total honesty. My agent was also an editor for 8 years before she flipped over to the agenting side of things. So she's got that hat that she can put on. And
is that a white hat or a black hat? Which?
Well, I would go with black. Okay. Which, yeah, go for it. I love my agent very much, but when the editor comes out, it can be a little hard sometimes. And I deal with that with chocolate.
All right. Good writing advice.
Yes.
Chocolate.
Right.
So, curious, you've got this book, you've got the 2 that you wrote before.
Right.
After this experience with this, do you think, oh, maybe I'll go back and try to rehab those, or that's a part of my life that's done?
It's hard because I still love those characters. I spent the time to write those books. But as a writer, I'm constantly being... I just have all kinds of inspiration all the time from all different avenues. So I have different ideas, and I talked about the yearbook thread of the other book, which is a book that I'm working on right now. I kind of pulled that apart, and I'm focusing on that. I sold 2 books when I sold this, and 2 standalone books. So
so you had a contract for 3.
Contract for 2. So I sold for 2. For 1 after this. So 2 total. They bought this book and then 1 other book. So 2 total. And we had to come up with an idea, and that was a tough part. After I sold the book and went through all the rejection with the first 2, I then started getting rejected on ideas for the second book with my publisher.
Okay.
So
a lot of rejection, a lot of chocolate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
What's your advice to somebody in a similar situation? What do you think what are some mistakes you made that you could help them avoid?
My first piece of advice to any writer who's trying to get published is to keep going. And that's not something that I can give them to avoid, because I obviously kept going with it. It's you never know when which query letter is going to get you an agent, or which book, in fact. I mean, again, I wrote 2 full books before this one landed me my agent. So you just have to keep going and keep writing and doing what you love, and not to try and follow a trend, to just kind of write what's true to you and what's going to come to you. As far as avoiding things, I think one of the things I did wrong was, that's hard. Okay. I queried a lot of agents on my first 2 books. I think I would spend less time querying. If I had 75 rejections on a book, that would tell me that probably no one's going to be interested.
That's the limit? It's 75?
Instead, I went to like 150 at one point, and then I'm like, okay, well, I don't think I'm going to sell that one.
Well, don't you have to, are you still sending the full manuscript at that point? So you got to pay to ship
you
it?
only send it if they're interested. So what you do first is you write a 1-page query letter. Just trying to hook an agent's interest. So I would send 20 a week. Someone's going to be interested. Well, they weren't in the first 2 at least. So, but with this book, I sent 20 queries letters out in 1 week, and I had about 10 bites the first week or 2. So it was a very different experience. I knew that this idea was more sellable and more interesting and things like that right off the bat. So.
Okay. Last question. When did you start identifying yourself as a writer? Was it something that predates the sale of the book, I take it?
Well, yes. And there I would think writer versus author. Once I sold the book and had the book in hand, I was an author in my mind. Writer, I can remember before I could even writing stories, scribbling stories. I lived across the street from a library in Dayton when I was growing up, and I always wanted to see my name on the cover of a book. I've always loved books and words and letters and how you can string everything together. It's just been amazing to me that you can tell a story that way. So I've always wanted to do this and always considered myself a writer, but not until the book was in hand did I consider myself an author.
Okay, so there's for you, it's writer, author, chocolate.
Yeah.
This is the pyramid.
Chocolate kind of encompasses all
everything.
of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Drips down through it all.
Authors covered in chocolate. That's here at the Ohio Anna Book Festival. Come see us. So, Kristina McBride, I thank you very much for being here on Writers Talk.
Thank you very much.
And from the Center for the Study and Teaching of Writing, this is Doug Dangler. Keep writing.